ULWT Commitment 2018 Special, the U.S. Senate debate between Senator Sherrod Brown and Congressman Jim Renacci. Here now, Cherie Pallello.
Well, good evening to you, and thank you for joining us tonight. We are in the beautiful Hall Auditorium on the campus of Miami University here in Oxford. Tonight, WLWT and Miami are bringing you the third and final debate in the U.S. Senate race between incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown and challenger Republican Congressman Jim Renacci. Questions for this debate are going to be coming from our panelists tonight. Some of them will be familiar faces to you this evening. We have WLWT News anchors Ashley Kirkland and Curtis Fuller joining us tonight, along with Miami University Chair and Professor of Justice and Community Studies, Dr. John Foran. Thank you all for being here. Each candidate is going to have 90 seconds to answer our questions, and the original respondent will then have a final 30 seconds as a rebuttal. We're going to begin tonight, though, by giving our audience a chance to welcome our candidates tonight with a warm applause. Thank you all so much for spending your Friday night with us. Auditorium is packed tonight, as you can see, with a very enthusiastic crowd. We want to get through as many questions as possible, though, tonight, so if you would now hold your applause until the end. So let's begin this evening with opening statements. Senator Brown, you won the coin toss and will give the first opening statement. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. 700 plus strong on the campus of Miami University, one of Ohio's great institutions of higher learning, serving this state and this country and this community for more than 200 years. Good news this week, President Trump 2 days ago signed Senator Portman's and my opioid legislation. Which is a big step, but still a first step on what we need to do to combat that terrible public health epidemic. I hope tonight we can explore issues like that. There are divisions in our nation. I'm hopeful tonight we can begin to heal some of those divisions. We've seen what's happened around the country with the bombs this week. I'm hopeful tonight will be a first step to unite us. Thank you.
Congressman Renacci, your opening statements. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you, and I want to thank Channel 5 and Miami University for holding this debate. I want to thank my wife of 35 years and my family for being here, and I want to thank Sherrod Brown for participating. Look, tonight you're going to hear from two different people with two different visions and two different backgrounds. I came from a blue-collar union family. My father was a railroad worker. My mother was a nurse. They taught me that anything was possible in this great country, and at the age of 24, I started my first business, employed over 3,000 people over 3 decades, and created over 1,500 jobs. My opponent, Sherrod Brown, was the son of a doctor, went to a Ivy League school, and when he graduated, he went right into politics. And he's been in politics for almost 5 decades now, creating only one job for himself. Our visions, we're going to see, are different tonight. My vision will always be to make Ohio first. What you're going to find is my opponent's vision is to make Washington first.
Let's get right to the question and answer portion of our debate here this evening. And I think we can all agree that the package bombs targeting high-profile Democrats is deplorable, criminal. However, like it or not, this has become a political issue, with high-ranking Democrats blaming President Trump for hate speech, and the president and Republicans blaming the mainstream media as well as fake news. So my question to you tonight is, do you think it's appropriate to use a criminal act for political gain? Senator Brown, you have 90 seconds.
First, thank you. And I neglected in my opening to thank my wife, Connie Schultz, who is here, and my brother, Bob, who is sitting with Connie. First of all, the police work on this was phenomenal, as was the work of postal workers and others who handled these bombs and did it safely. I applaud them. There are too many divisions in this country. I didn't plan this, of course. This mug was left on the stage for our water. I'm drinking directly out of the bottle, but this was the U.S. District Court naturalization ceremony held on one of Miami's regional campuses. It's a quote from Ronald Reagan. This ceremony was just held a month ago. The quote from President Reagan: "More than any other country, our strength comes from our own immigrant heritage and our capacity to welcome those from other lands." Think about President Reagan. Think what President Bush did the day after, I believe it was the day after September 11th, or within a week, he went to a mosque. I would hope that Congressman Renacci would join me in asking the president to lead us. I don't blame the president entirely for this, of course, but I do think the divisive rhetoric hurts us as a country. I'm hopeful that we can be more unified. I ask Congressman Renacci to join me in calling on President Trump to lead these efforts towards unity.
Congressman Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And again, look, criminal acts, absolutely not. A divisive rhetoric, absolutely not. And when it comes from both sides, it's truly an issue. We can't have this in politics. And it was one of the reasons why when I went to Washington, one of the first things I did when I was in my first hearing, when I started to hear Republicans and Democrats arguing with each other, and it came to me, I said, this is ridiculous. I did not come to Washington to sit here and argue with both sides. I came here to get something done. And that first week, I formed what I called the Bipartisan Working Group, because one of the Democrats walked over to me and said, look, there's an opportunity here. After I said, we can't keep going down this path, they said, I'd like to work with you and get that done. And we worked together, and now every week we have a bipartisan breakfast. I can tell you that bipartisan breakfast is the difference between civility and getting things accomplished. And I'm proud to say that that group's been able to get almost 15 different bills passed out of the House and Senate. I'm also proud to say that I have just as many Democrat friends as I have Republican friends. Our problems in Washington are not Republican and they're not Democrat. They're American problems that can be solved with American solutions, and I continue to want to work across the aisle to get that done.
Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Yeah, I would hope that Congressman Renacci would, in fact, join with me in calling on the president. Breakfasts are fine. You can always get congressmen and women to show up for free breakfasts and talk about bipartisanship, but let's see what you do. And this debate will show all the efforts when I've teamed up with Senator Portman, when I've teamed up with Senator Capito, a Republican from south of here, or Senator Todd Young on steel issues, a Republican just 10 miles west of here, or Senator McConnell or Senator Paul just south of here. But the fact is, these are bombs. These are attempted murder. These are attempted assassination. The divisive comments coming from too many people in politics, calling people's names, shouting, lock her up at rallies. I wish we could tone it down. I wish the president would lead to help Congressman Renacci and me do this.
Thank you. John Foran, you have the next question.
All right, thank you. I would like to ask both of you a question about Medicare. The trustees of Medicare recently announced that the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, which funds Part A of Medicare, will run dry basically in 2026, which is 3 years earlier than had been projected just last year. And polls tell us that lots of Americans are worried about health care generally and worried about Medicare specifically in some cases. So first, Congressman Renacci, can you explain your plan for addressing this funding problem in Medicare? For instance, do you support changes in eligibility requirements or perhaps higher taxes, or what is your approach to that? And Senator Brown, what is your plan? And should we be talking about possible expansion of Medicare before addressing the long-term systemic funding problem? So, Senator Renacci or Congressman Renacci?
Well, thank you for that. And look, I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, look, the first thing we need to do, and I would ask Senator Brown to join me in this, is to take the $716 billion that was taken from Medicare and put over into the Affordable Care Act and put that back to Medicare. That will help make Medicare solvent in a longer term. The other thing we need to do when it comes to entitlements is let's look at entitlements and say, well, here's a couple things we can do. Number one, those that are retired or near retirement, we have to protect those benefits. Number two, when it comes to any of the issues to fix entitlements, we need to make sure, and especially Medicare, everything's on the table. And number three, we got to quit this political rhetoric that you're going to hear from Senator Brown, where he'll say, Renacci wants to do this and Republicans want to do this. We need to quit scaring. We need to absolutely quit scaring the seniors. And I would also say, that if it was up to Senator Brown, we would have Medicare for all. He's talked about that. He supports it. He's voted for a single pay. He actually tried to amend the Affordable Care Act for a single payer plan. $32 trillion is what that would cost. $32 trillion. In the end, that would mean we double our taxes and move forward. Look, I'm going to continue to work to make sure that these benefits like Medicare are not only around for those today that are in retirement age or getting close, but they're there for the future as well. We need to make sure that we're working for our Ohioans. I'm always going to work to make sure Ohio's first versus my opponent who believes Washington should be first.
Senator Brown, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I've always fought my entire career for a stronger Medicare and stronger Social Security. I've resisted attempts by Republican leadership from Newt Gingrich to George Bush to this president, attempts to weaken Medicare, to privatize it, to raise the eligibility age for Medicare and Social Security. We need to deal with the cost, for sure, of health care and Medicare. That means going after the issue of pre-existing condition, not let Mitch McConnell and the president and the White House strip the protections, the consumer protections for pre-existing condition. But here's what you don't do. Senator McConnell has said after the election, the way you pay for the tax cuts that were rammed through Congress a year ago, signed by the president, the tax cuts where more than 3/5 of the benefits go to the wealthiest 1% of people in this country. You pay for those tax cuts, Senator McConnell said, after the election we'll pay for them by cutting and raising the eligibility, cutting services for Medicare and Social Security and raising the eligibility age. So in other words, what Senator McConnell's saying and what his party is saying is that you give tax cuts to rich people, overwhelmingly goes to rich people, and you pay for it by going after people, by sticking it to the middle class. You go after the coal miners in this audience that paid into Medicare and Social Security their whole lives. You cut their benefits so you can give tax cuts to rich people. That's both bad economics and immoral.
Congressman Renacci, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. Well, the senator actually hit number 3. He went after the attack instead of talked about the truth. There is no one in Washington that wants to take and cut pre-existing conditions. He knows that, but he'll continue to talk about it. There is no one in Washington that wants to hurt seniors. And the Tax Cut and Jobs bill, it's actually been PolitiFact that it actually is helping everyone, 85% of the people. So we're going to debate tonight about facts, not fiction. And I'll continue to want to talk about those things as we continue down this debate.
Congressman, thank you. And again, please hold your applause. Our next question is for Ashley. Ashley?
Senator Brown, you started touching on pre-existing conditions, and they're a very terrifying reality and situation for millions of families, but also a difficult question for the government, of course. Should the U.S. either support insurance companies' costs or force insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions? Also, what is your plan to cover pre-existing conditions?
Senator Brown, you have 90 seconds.
The answer, of course, is yes. My plan is that we did that in the Affordable Care Act. For 10 years, people have had the protections. They've known that the insurance companies cannot cancel your insurance because you're sick. 5 million people in this state, 5 million Ohioans have a pre-existing condition. 5 million. If Congress has its way, this Congress, this president, this court, it looks like, has its way, they will see the consumer protections for a pre-existing condition be eliminated. And when I hear Congressman Renacci say that everybody supports the protections for pre-existing condition, the Congress voted literally more than 20 times. Congressman Renacci voted more than 20 times. I think the Congress has voted even more times than that on it. He's missed more votes than any other member of Congress, so I think he missed some of those too. But more than 20 times, Congress voted to eliminate the consumer protections for pre-existing condition. Yet now, all over the country, Republican candidates for office are saying, stand with us. We will support consumer protections for pre-existing conditions. Look how they vote, not what they say, honestly.
Congressman Renacci, your response, 90 seconds.
Well, absolutely. Again, here's the fear tactics that the senator seems to want to talk about. In the end, he thinks that the only way you can make health care good for Ohioans is that he keeps wanting to scare people with pre-existing conditions. Look, health care today, the Affordable Care Act, we've talked about this in the past. It's working for those in the safety net, and the wealthy are okay. But the middle, the husband, the mother who has 2 children, 3 children, can barely afford to pay the premiums. The premiums now have raised almost to 132% since the Affordable Care Act has been passed. And what we really need to be doing is we need to be looking at an Affordable Care Act that is affordable. And that's why I did vote. I did vote to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act with something that would work, because I believe we have to make sure it's working for those in the middle. But it also means we keep pre-existing conditions, we keep the elimination of caps, and we keep the dependence on their plan. And these are things we can do. If we're going to do that, though, we've got to be willing to work together to get that done. We can't just say the only way is the Affordable Care Act, because I can tell you, whether it's John and Janet from Medina or Sandy from Toledo, where I was just at, who said to me, Congressman, I can't afford the premiums anymore. And even if I can afford the premiums, I can't afford the deductible. You got to help me. These are the issues we need to be working on. But we can't scare people by saying, well, we're going to eliminate pre-existing conditions. This is a lie that continues to be told, which is just not true.
Mr. Brown, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Of course, we're not. I'm not scaring people. Mitch McConnell's scaring people by saying after the election he's going to pay for the tax cuts by going after Medicare and Social Security. Those aren't my words. Those are the leader of his. If he wins this election, that would be the leader of his body, his party, doing that. It's been. Congressman Renacci forgets he's been in Congress almost a decade. He's been in the majority party the whole time. They kept voting to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They say repeal and replace, but it was like repeal, underline, replace, question mark. I don't know what we're going to replace it. We just hate the Affordable Care Act because it's called Obamacare, but we're not doing anything to protect consumer protections on pre-existing condition. They did nothing for 10 years on that. Now all of a sudden they act interested because it's election time.
Thank you. I have to stop you there. Our next question comes from Curtis Fuller.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about immigration. It's gaining renewed attention, no doubt, because of the migrant caravan from Central America. President Trump has claimed the caravan includes criminals and Middle Easterners and that it may be financed by the Democratic Party. None of these claims appear to be supported by any specific information. So the question is, what is your position on these claims, number one? And how does this discussion impact U.S. immigration policies moving forward?
Congressman Renacci, 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And again, here's a perfect example where I'm always going to listen to Ohioans and Ohioans first, their safety and security. My opponent, he'll support illegal immigrants first in this case. And here's the reason I say that. I do believe we need a wall. I believe we need a wall, and again, we not only need that wall, we need to make sure that we have an immigration system that works. If it was up to my opponent, we would have no wall. His party believes that we should not have ICE, and he supports sanctuary cities in Ohio. So when it comes to the caravan, he would love for everybody to just come rolling into Ohio and be here in a sanctuary city. The difference is we have a broken immigration system that needs to be fixed. We need to be able to look and change this, and it's Congress's fault. There's no doubt about it. My opponent's been in Congress for 25 years. He had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and they didn't touch immigration. We have an immigration system that's broken. When it comes to the people in the caravan, look, America is a sovereign country, and America does believe in bringing people in, but there's a legal way to come in. There's an absolute legal way to come in. And coming in a group of people in an invasion type issue, that's not the way to do it. What we need to do is make sure that we work to get that done. I will promise you this, as your next senator, I will work to make sure immigration is a priority. I will make sure that I'm working for Ohioans and Ohio first, not as the senator would be, which is for illegal immigrants first. By the way, he also said last week that all those people that were here illegally because they were working, they should be able to stay here. That's just not fair either.
Senator Brown, 90 seconds.
Thank you. I take a backseat to nobody in my interest and support and advocacy for a secure border. I teamed up with Senator Portman, who grew up in the next county, to make sure that we can do everything we can to keep fentanyl and carfentanil out of the border, the so-called Interdict Act. We're doing other kinds of things. But I believe we can pass legislation. I believe we can protect our border without tearing children away from their families. A new report today on another couple dozen children that are unaccounted for, who have been ripped away from their families at the border. Was that what we stand for as a nation? It occurred to Connie and me that children, we have 7 grandchildren. 4 of them are under the age of 4. It occurred to us that children under 4 don't even know the names of their parents and the city in which they live. And we've separated those families and not accounted for those children. So we can secure our borders without ripping children from families. And Congressman Renacci said it's Congress's fault. Well, yeah, it is. Not that we've not fixed this. The Senate 4 years ago, passed a bipartisan bill, good, strong bipartisan bill. Senator Portman, I believe, voted for him, not positive. I did. Got 70-some votes in the Senate, more or less. We passed that bipartisan bill, turned it to the House, and all they wanted to do was demagogue it. A Republican majority in the House would not pass an immigration bill that was bipartisan, that would have been a path to citizenship, make them earn it. Those 13 million people who are here undocumented would have secured even more strongly the border, would have done all the things that we all talk about and around which in this country there is consensus.
Mr. Renacci, 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. Well, Senator Brown, if you take a back seat to no one, I want to know who's driving that car, because it's definitely not Ohioans, and it may even be illegal immigrants. Look, the senator keeps talking about his work with Senator Portman. It's amazing, because Senator Portman supports me and is actually supporting me in this election. So I'm glad to see that he continues to want to talk about Senator Portman. I get it. It's an election year. But in the end, we should be talking about immigration that works. We should be talking about an immigration system that works. And we should be talking not about sanctuary cities and not about no borders and not about eliminating ICE. We should be talking about Ohio values. I will always put Ohioans first and Ohio first, not Washington first.
Next question. We all watched the recent drama over the confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, as he was accused of committing a sexual assault as a teenager, but no charges were ever filed and no police were ever involved. Do you think that it's fair to discredit someone publicly when no arrests were made and no charges were ever filed? Senator Brown, you have 90 seconds.
I met with Judge Kavanaugh prior to the confirmation hearings before Dr. Ford testified, and I believe Dr. Ford. I want to make that clear. I met with Judge Kavanaugh. I talked to him. I looked at his record. I made a decision prior to the hearings to oppose him because he clearly in his career and in his writings, even though we could get little information about him because the White House and the Senate leadership blocked most of the documentation of his career, it was clear that he put a thumb on the scale throughout his career. He's put a thumb on the scales of justice, supporting corporations over workers, supporting Wall Street over consumers, supporting health insurance companies over individual American patients who have pre-existing conditions. So it was an easy choice for me to be no. I thought he didn't have the temperament and demeanor in those hearings. I said I believe Dr. Ford. I believe that we should have done more investigation of his background, not just in terms of that allegation, but in terms of other things he had done in terms of his writing as part of the Bush White House. It was a partisan spectacle where Republican leadership jammed that confirmation through the Senate. It was a bit of embarrassment to the entire United States Senate.
Congressman Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Well, look, I've said it was a travesty and an embarrassment to the United States Senate. I also said that, look, the Democrats set a standard of conduct where they said an unsubstantiated claim. Something that's unsubstantiated means that that individual or any individual cannot serve on the Supreme Court. I've said this time and time again. If you're going to set that standard of conduct, you better set it on yourself. And that's why I've said time and time again, we have a senator here in Ohio who has not even met that standard of conduct. No man should ever raise their hand to a woman, number one. Number two, forgiveness does not mean it didn't happen. Number three, when you have court documents, when you have documents that substantiate things like abuse, that tells the story in itself. Number four, when you ask another senator, as Senator Brown did, to step down because of sexual assault, senator needs to look at himself. I've said this time and time again. He does not get grandfathered in for his history. He has asked others to step down. He should be stepping down too. Domestic
Please. I need you to be, please do not interrupt.
Domestic abuse is a public issue that because people want to make it private is what causes it to continue.
Senator Brown, I know you want to respond. You have 30 seconds.
You said, you bring it up time and time again, you do. My former wife has asked you to stop attacking my family, to stop attacking our family. She is a supporter. Newspapers all over the state have asked you to stop running these kinds of ads and have asked you to stop making these kinds of attacks in every single debate. Congressman Renacci, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Okay, let's all take a breath. Let's all take a breath here. Okay, we're going to have to ask people to leave if you're not going to remain silent, please. Let's take a breath here. We're going to switch topics now, and our next question comes from Dr. Foran. John?
All right, thank you. I would like to ask about the budget deficit at the federal level and taxes, basically. So the budget deficit for the fiscal year that just ended, September 30th, came in at $779 billion, which was a 17% increase over the previous year. And that happened in a period of time in the wake of a tax cut where the economy was doing quite well overall, and federal spending actually declined slightly as a percentage of the economy, or as a share of the economy. So that would ordinarily be a time where one would expect smaller deficits rather than larger deficits. So given that context, I would ask both of you, basically, what do we do ultimately? What's our strategy for addressing this problem, given that the Congressional Budget Office, among others, has projected trillion-dollar deficits as basically as far as the eye can see?
Mr. Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And again, I sit on the Budget Committee, I sit on the Ways and Means Committee. We've analyzed this, and here's where we see. When you look at our budget deficits, what you see is that they've been going for years and years and years. And the biggest problem is demographics. And as soon as we start talking about that, we can fix it. What you're going to hear the senators say is, oh, it's the tax cuts. Look, the tax cuts, the CBO director came in front of the Budget Committee and said, you know what the issue is here? And I asked him specifically. He said the issue is demographics. The tax cuts are actually driving our economy forward. We had 4.3% growth today. We have reported 3.5% growth. If you go back to the late 90s, you're going to find the reason why we had budget surpluses is not because of what people did in Congress. In fact, they budgeted and spent more than they budgeted. The big difference was they had growth in the economy, 6.2%, 6.1%, 5.7%. Look, I believe we need to continue to work very hard, knowing that the Tax Cut and Jobs Bill and what it's doing for Ohioans and how it's growing the economy, that represents, as the senator will say, it's a big number. It's 15%. The truth of it is 85% of our deficits are demographics. And what we need to do is have people that aren't career politicians like my opponent, who has been in Washington way too long, worried about the next election instead of next generation, realizing that we have to make sure, number one, we protect those entitlements and we protect those that are retirement age or near retirement age, but at the same time, we realize we have to change and make sure that those entitlements are around for the future, and we have to be willing to look at everything and quit saying, you know, the things that are trying to scare these people, especially seniors. Nobody's going to take seniors' benefits away from them. What we need to do is make sure that those benefits are available for those 30 and 40-year-olds when they become seniors too.
Senator Brown, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. My entire career has been devoted to how do you grow the economy by cutting taxes for the middle class, because you grow the economy from the middle out, not tax cuts that trickle down and supposedly help people in Ohio and around the country. 3/4 of this tax cut goes to the richest 1%. We all know that. But here's what happened. I went to the White House with a dozen senators. I presented 2 bills to the President of the United States. One was the Patriot Corporation Act, which says if companies do the right thing, pay their workers well, do their production in the United States, they get a lower tax rate. In addition, I presented the Working Families Tax Relief Act, which focuses on tax cuts for the middle class. I handed the bills to the president. He said he liked them. Then the meeting started in the majority leader's office, in Mitch McConnell's office, in Paul Ryan's office on the House side. The meeting started, and this turned into a 3/4 of all the tax breaks went to the wealthiest 1%. But you know what? People that Congressman Renacci went to Congress to help. The billionaires and the millionaires, that's who this tax bill was written for. And maybe it's no surprise. I mean, Congressman Renacci, as well known around the state, Congressman Renacci had $13 million in income that he failed to report that he wasn't going to pay taxes on, claiming a loss. And the Ohio Tax Commissioner went after him, made him pay interest and pay a lot of taxes on that $13 million. So I understand why he wants tax cuts for the rich, because he benefits, but my country doesn't benefit on those kinds of tax cuts.
Congressman Renacci, 30 seconds.
Well, maybe a senator needs to pay attention, because WT actually said that his statement that he just talked about me and taxes was absolutely false. And he needs to start paying attention. But that's okay. I understand he's going to continue to have those false statements. Let's really look at the issue here. He can continue to talk about, by the way, he also said my entire career has been, well, guess what? He's failed, because his entire career, he's added about $17 trillion to the debt. So if we're going to fix things, we need to be able to work together. It's about growth. It's about working with this president. It's about making sure our economy's growing, good jobs are available. I'm going to continue to work to make Ohio first. He's going to continue to work to make Washington first.
Ashley has a question directed first at Senator Brown.
All right, so we seem to have two distinct ideas about job creation and a corporate first plan with tax cuts in hopes of spurring growth in the economy, and a worker first plan with higher wages in hopes of overall economic growth. Okay, I know that those are two simplified versions of both the same idea, so please walk us through your plan for job growth and economic job creation and economic growth.
Senator Brown, you have 90 seconds.
I mentioned, I'll give a little more detail. I mentioned I approached the president with the Working Families Tax Relief Act. It would have expanded earned income tax credit. It would have expanded child tax credit. It would have meant that people that get up every day and work hard, people making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, would have had several $1,000s more in their pockets in a refundable tax credit. That's what grows the economy, because those are people that go out and spend the money. Obviously, they don't put it in a Swiss bank account. The other bill was the Patriot Corporation Act. It's simple. It says if a company pays good wages, if it pays decent, it provides decent health care and retirement benefits, and it does its production in the United States of America, that corporation gets a lower tax rate. That's not the way Congress chose to do it. That's why, even though corporate profits are up, and they are, the stock market's up, although not so clear. It's lost most of its gains over the last 10 or 12 months, but corporate profits are up, executive compensation has exploded, productivity's gone up, but workers' wages are flat. And I measure the economy on how workers are doing in our state, how middle-class workers, is our economy growing that way. Then, to make it even worse, on this tax cut that for the wealthy that Mitch McConnell rammed through the Senate and that Congressman Renacci says he was an architect of, Mitch McConnell has said he's going to go after middle-income people after the election to pay for the budget deficit that the professor asked about, to pay for that huge explosion in the deficit. You go after middle-class people who have paid into Social Security and Medicare their whole lives. That's just wrong.
Time. Thank you. Mr. Renacci, 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And again, the senator says he knows how to grow the economy. He's been around for 25 years. And look at how the economy is growing in the last 21 months. The answer is pretty simple. I was a business guy. I understand these regulations. There's not a regulation that Senator Brown doesn't love. The problem is the regulatory climate is overburdensome and the tax code was outdated. And what we had to do is we had to change that. And we're seeing the growth. I'm happy to support what's going on in our economy right now. I'm happy to say what the Tax Cut and Jobs bill that he's condemning is actually growing our economy, and it's helping people as I travel this state. He needs to come back to the state more often. I tell this all the time. He needs to travel the state and talk to the people who are coming up to me and saying, Congressman, I got extra money in my pay. I'm now able to fix my refrigerator or fix my car. These are the things that people are saying. And the economy is growing because of the Tax Cut and Jobs bill. So let's look at it from that standpoint. Let's not go back to the past. The senator would like to go back to the past of 1.8% growth. I want to continue in the future with the jobs cut, the Tax Cut and Jobs bill, which is growing this economy. I want to continue to have the job growth that we're having in Ohio. I want to make sure, no matter what, that I'm always looking to make Ohio first, not Washington first, with some of the ideas that the senator's been talking about for 25 years.
Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. I think it's pretty clear whose side I'm on here. I'm a little amused when Congressman Renacci says I don't go back to the state. I'm here every weekend. Every day I get up and I put on my suit made by union workers in a plant 10 miles from my house. I get in my union-made Jeep and I drive around the state and I ride around the state. Zach usually drives me, or Drew usually drives me, full disclosure. But I see this state. I stop at the rest areas. I see people every day. Congressman Renacci gets in his airplane, paid for by a contributor. He hasn't even complied with federal law, paying for the plane under federal campaign finance rules. He sees the state from way up here. I see it from the streets of Oxford and the streets of Cleveland and the streets of Toledo and the streets of Zanesville. Pretty hard to say I'm not here.
Curtis, you have the next question.
Let's continue talking about this issue of jobs, workers. So here's a hot button issue that impacts families, impact workers. I know, Senator, you just said that corporate profits up, wages flat. Just last month, the National Retail Federation called the administration's tariffs, quote, a tax on American families. The president says we need increased tariffs to improve our economy, make America more competitive on the world stage. So my question to both of you, explain your current view of U.S. trade policy and also the president's position on this.
Congressman Renacci, you can begin with 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And look, the president was elected in 2016 because workers here in Ohio realized not only were they not getting a fair shake, but they weren't being represented anymore. And that's why he was elected. And the tariffs are his way of trying to negotiate to change things. There is no doubt we have a trade war. And the trade war has been going on for years while Senator Brown's been in Washington, and past presidents on both parties have let it happen. This president has actually said, I'm going to make a difference, and that's why he was elected. And I'm proud to be with him and stand with him and continue to stand with him. But here's the issue. These tariffs are a tax. And what we need to do is use them to make sure that it's fair and reasonable. And in the end, we need to make sure that Ohio workers get the benefit of the jobs, and that we can go back and look and make sure that China isn't attacking us anymore. But I will always look at these trade deals, and it's important. I know the senator, he's going to have his another key line that says, I voted for 3 trade deals. And I did. And I did, because I had Ohio. I wish he was with me when I traveled the state of Ohio, because I never see him. But I will tell you this, as I traveled the state of Ohio, and I talked to, whether it was the manufacturers, the Ohio Manufacturers Association, or even the farmers, they wanted those trade deals passed. But here's the difference. I'm also a believer that we got to pass trade deals, we got to look at trade deals, and we don't need to keep them for 25 or 30 years. If they're wrong, we need to fix them. The problem is, past administrations and this senator have allowed these trade deals just to continue.
Senator Brown, 90 seconds.
Congressman, if you don't see me, it's because you're not looking down from the airplane. I mean, I'm going up US 127 out of Oxford or across I-70 from Dayton to Belmont County somewhere, but that's neither here nor there. I look at every trade agreement as, how does this affect jobs in my state? How does it affect working class families? How does it affect small businesses in Mansfield, where I grew up, or in Middletown or Hamilton nearby here? I look at every trade agreement that way. That's why I oppose NAFTA. You're right. That's why I oppose CAFTA. That's why I opposed PNTR with China. That's why I fought with presidents in both parties on these trade agreements, because I think they were bipartisanly wrong. Now, I support the tariffs because I think the tariffs are a temporary tool for a long-term policy. You got to think back about how we got here. We got here because companies shut down in Hamilton or Middletown or Springfield or Dayton. They move overseas, they set up production, and they collect a tax break from the federal government for doing that. Change our tax policy, which I've advocated, change our trade policy. Congressman Renacci, on the other hand, not only has voted for every trade agreement, he predicted I'd say it, good prescient work on that, but he did vote for them, even though President Trump has said North South Korea is a horrible trade agreement. But more importantly, he voted for a tax bill that said this: if a company shuts down production in Sydney or Zanesville, Ohio, And they're paying 21% right now if they're producing in this country in Cincinnati. If they move to Mexico, they get a 50% off coupon on their taxes. They pay 21% producing here, 10.5% producing overseas. We've got to change tax policy, not just trade policy. And Congressman Renacci just last year voted for that tax bill that did that.
Mr. Renacci, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Well, thank you. And again, I've asked the senator to debate me on the tax bill because it sounds like he doesn't understand it. Companies are not getting a 50% tax break. What he needs to realize and read the tax law is they weren't paying taxes before. The current tax bill actually now brings more taxes in. So he needs to understand the tax bill before he starts talking about it. It's one of the reasons why I know he wouldn't debate me on the tax bill. And if he wants another debate, I'm all in on that because I'm going to continue to always worry about Ohioans and trying to make Ohioans first. This senator wants to talk about Washington and making Washington first.
Gentlemen, let's talk about gun control now. Many schools in our area are arming teachers. Kids don't feel safe in class. Just last month, we had a mass shooting in the heart of our city on Fountain Square. This is a simple question. Do we need tougher gun restrictions? And if so, what restrictions would you propose? Senator Brown, 90 seconds.
Yes, we do. No parent should have to think about the safety of their child when they send their children to school, period. Now, what we should do, we should pass simple, common sense gun measures. That includes bump stocks, banning bump stocks. It includes universal background checks. It includes banning assault weapons. It includes one of the most insane loopholes in the law where if you're on the terrorist watch list, if you're someone in the United States on the terrorist watch list, you can't go to the Dayton or the Cincinnati airport and get on an airplane. You can't go to John Glenn International Airport in Columbus and get on an airplane, but you can buy an assault weapon. Yet my opponent and Republicans in the majority will not even close that loophole. Why? Because they're all in the pocket of the gun lobby. The gun lobby spends millions of dollars. I know that. I'm not whining here. I'm a grown-up. I chose to do this for a living. But I understand the gun lobby has spent millions of dollars against me. They've given tens of thousands of dollars to Congressman Renacci. They always get their way with this Congress because this Congress is in the pocket of the gun lobby, even though the public has had it with this kind of, and has pushed us to pass common sense gun measures.
Congressman Renacci, 90 seconds, please. Please.
Well, the difference is between myself and Senator Brown is that I've taken the time to sit down with teachers, counselors, police officers, and talk about this issue. And what I've learned is that in many cases, we shouldn't be taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, but we do need to look at what's the effect and the cause. And we do need to look at mental health. And I've said this time and time again. There are issues when it comes to guns, and there are issues when it comes to mental health, and we need to be looking at those. We need to be making sure that we're talking about those issues, not this issue of we need to take guns away. Again, Steve Scalise, one of my colleagues in the House, was shot in a gun-free zone. How much more can you take away other than a gun-free zone? And yet he was shot. The problem is we have to make sure we're talking about the individual who shot my colleague, Steve Scalise, and the mental health issues that we're starting to neglect and have been neglecting. We need to be able to start thinking of Ohioans, making Ohioans first. And when it comes to lobbyists, there's probably something that my opponent doesn't take a back seat to. He's collected over $27 million from all of these lobbyists. And again, that's the big difference.
Senator Brown, 30 seconds.
Yeah, there's two things you can always predict will happen after another awful mass shooting in our schools. You can predict Republicans to say, my thoughts and prayers are with the families, and they are, and mine are too, and you can predict that they will say, it's all about mental health. Of course, we send our thoughts and prayers. Of course we support mental health, but that's as far as they'll go because that's as short as the gun lobby leash is around their neck. The fact is that this same crowd that says we've got to do something about mental health voted 20 times to cut back on Governor Kasich's expansion of Medicaid. That's why Richard Cordray is so important in this governor's race, because he's going to keep the Medicaid expansion that apparently Attorney General DeWine and Congressman Renacci want to take away.
Thank you. Our next question comes from John for Congressman Renacci.
All right, thank you. Since we're here on a college campus, let me ask a question that's of interest for some of the students in the audience. And that's the issue of student loan debt that's been characterized by some analysts as an emerging crisis. Basically, currently, roughly 1.7 million Ohioans are carrying student loan debt. And in the aggregate, we're talking about $53.5 billion, according to recent estimates. Ohio is ranked 7th in the country in total student loan debt. And so, given that context and the fact that student loan debt is now higher than any other form of debt, consumer debt other than mortgages, is this something the federal government should address? And if so, how should it be addressed?
Mr. Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And yes, student loans does need to be addressed. And the issue is, look, there's nobody that understands it better than me. I had a student loan, and I worked a number of jobs to go through college. So I understand what it means to take out that debt. I understand what it means to have to pay that debt. But we have to look at the process. I've said this all along. I was in Youngstown the other day, again, driving through, and didn't see the senator, as he says he's all around. But I was in Youngstown, and I was talking to an individual who said to me, I could get over $150,000 in student loans when I was in college, but now that I'm starting my business, I can't get a $40,000 debt. That's an issue. That's a problem. So we need to make sure that we're looking at student debt. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're talking to students, because sometimes if you're running up $150,000 worth of debt for a job that's only going to pay you $25,000, these are issues we need to be talking about early. And the other thing is, sometimes everybody's not meant to go to college. There are a number of people who have taken out student debt, realized college was not for them, and then they're stuck with those things. These are things we can change early on, and making sure that in high school, counselors are talking about opportunities, jobs, what's available, and again, in the end, for those that do go to college, we need to make sure that we're looking at that student debt. The difference between me and my opponent is, again, I'm going to always look toward Ohioans first. He's going to look toward Washington and those lobbyists that have given him the money, and that's going to be the big difference.
Senator Brown, 90 seconds.
20. Just to make clear, 155,000 contributors to my campaign, an average of $42. I have to remind Congressman Renacci of that every debate. The problem, I mean, student debt is a terribly oppressive burden on far too many young people. It means they may not be able to start the business they dreamed of. It may mean they delay getting married or having children. It may mean they can't buy a home. It's a terrible affliction we've put on that generation. In Congress and our state legislature, our state government has a duty to fix it. The problem, Columbus is so corrupt with the money that the entire state government in Columbus has robbed money from public education through ECOT, through a whole host of other kinds of privatization schemes. So we're not spending enough money on public education from state government. We're not investing. That causes higher tuition rates at Miami and Kent State and everywhere else. But when we could do something about it in Washington, we had legislation, we had an amendment on the floor that would have reduced the interest rate on 25 million student borrowers. 25 million would have had lower interest rates. What did Congressman Renacci do? He chose the banks over the students. He chose the banks over the students. That's what we've seen far too much in this special interest government that we've seen in Washington that cares way more about corporate interests than it does students, than it does voting rights, than it does the environment, than it does to working families in this great state of Ohio.
Mr. Renacci, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Well, I just found another thing that disqualifies a senator from being a senator. He just calculated 155,000 times 42. That gives you $6 million. I want to know where the other 21 million came from. Look, this senator has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from banks and financial institutions. And because of that, he makes his decision based on the dollars he receives, not on Ohioans. I can tell you time and time again, I am always going to work toward making sure I put Ohioans and Ohioans first, not lobbyists in Washington first.
Ashley, you have the next question.
Okay, I think we can all agree that this has been a brutal campaign. Ads on both sides have been negative. In fact, if people believe the ads, voters think that both of you are criminals. This is your final debate. Let's end on a positive note. What is done that you think your opponent has done right while being in office? Positive note.
I appreciate that question. First of all, I'm the only person in this race that's actually run positive ads on television. I've run a number of positive ads about workers, about health care, about my dog Franklin in puppy dog treats from China, all of those things. But here, I'll say something nice. Congressman Renacci and I worked together on providing on giving Larry Doby the Congressional Medal of Honor. Larry Doby was the first black player in the American League. Only 11 weeks after Jackie Robinson, he played for the Cleveland Indians. He was a Hall of Famer. He hit the first home run ever in a World Series. He was a committed citizen afterwards. And I thank Congressman Renacci for working on that bill with me. And I particularly thank Congressman Renacci because, he grew up in Pittsburgh and grew up as a Pirate and Steelers fan. But now he's rooting for the Cleveland Indians, and conversion of anybody is possible. So thank you.
Congressman Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Well, let's talk about the ads. Again, for somebody who raised $27 million, he's actually spent about $11 million attacking me. Now, that's a fact. I've only spent $500,000, $500,000. So look at the difference when we talk about attack ads. That's why I'm surprised people say that I'm attacking. Here we have Senator Brown almost spending $11 million attacking me versus the $500,000, it's a big difference. And that's the issue. That's part of the reason why we have to fix campaign finance laws so people like the senator can't raise $27 million, because it makes it hard to compete. And he knows that, but being a senator and being in Washington for 25 years, he loves those lobbyists. Look, I will also tell you, it's kind of funny. I'm a sports fan. And as many of you know, being here in Miami University, it is the home of Ben Roethlisberger, the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But also, I was a Cleveland Indians season ticket holder for 17 years. I was also a Cleveland Browns season ticket holder. I was also an Ohio State season ticket holder, because I do love sports and I believe in sports. And it was one of the reasons why I initiated and started the Larry Doby bill that the senator is talking about. And I'm happy to see that he did put it over on the Senate. He's working. But by the way, I've already got it passed out of the House. I'd like to see if he can get it passed out of the Senate. It's easy to talk about it. I'm hoping he can do it, because then by the end of this year, we can talk about something that actually did get accomplished.
Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
I'm not sure that was actually something nice he said about me, but Ashley, you be the judge. Campaigns are about ideas and contrasts, and I make the very clear contrast. His proudest accomplishment is a tax bill where 3/4 of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1%, including him as a millionaire, and he could afford those season tickets. I never could afford them, but I'm not complaining here. I'm not complaining at all. But the fact is that this tax bill benefited people like Congressman Renacci. It didn't benefit the middle class in this state, and fundamentally, that's the difference. And the cherry on top is you make Medicare and Social Security beneficiaries pay for the tax cut for Congressman Renacci and the millionaires and billionaires.
Okay, listen, we have one final question here. We're going to give you each 30 seconds. My question is, you're both saying that you can work together, that you are able to be bipartisan. So give us a specific instance when you changed your mind, you opposed your party's view, and you reached across the aisle to help another party. The first question goes to Senator Brown. You have 30 seconds.
Trade every single day. I work against presidents who are in my party. I'm working with President Trump. I don't exactly agree the way he's done it, but I'm publicly supporting the tariffs. I went to the floor of the Senate and stopped a bill that would have undercut his ability to move forward on those tariffs against intense Republican and Democratic opposition to my position. But an even better example is how I helped to put together the Farm Bill. 86 votes in the Senate for a farm bill it's a family farmer bill. It's a conservation bill. It will help Ohio River and Lake Erie. It was an economic development bill. It's real bipartisanship at work.
Thank you. Congressman Renacci, you have 30 seconds.
Well, again, look, the tax bill is a perfect example. When it first came out, it was rolled out by my party. And by the way, it'd be surprising for the senator to know that I have opposed my party in a number of cases, including the governor here when it comes to Medicaid expansion. But when it came to the tax bill, look, I was the first one to say I'm not going to support it because it's not good for Ohioans. The difference when it first came out was it had things in it that were not good for Ohioans. I went to the speaker and said I'm not going to support it, and I told him these are the reasons. I worked very hard to get it changed so it worked in the benefit of Ohioans, and then I worked with Senator Portman when it went over the Senate to get it done so it did work for Ohioans and benefited Ohioans.
Thank you. This concludes our question and answer segment. I now want to move on to closing statements. You will each have 90 seconds. Senator Brown, you will go first.
Thank you. Thanks again for hosting this, and thanks to Miami University. Throughout this campaign, Congressman Renacci has repeated how much he hates Washington, D.C. The reason for that is he went to Washington for the wrong reasons. He went to Washington to put his thumb on the scales in support of corporate interests over workers, in support of Wall Street over consumers. I went to Washington for a very different reason. My first campaign for Congress, I promised the citizens of the 13th District I would pay my own health insurance until Congress passed insurance for all Ohioans. I paid my own health insurance for over a decade. Today, Connie and I are on the exchange with 12 million other Americans. The exchange is created by the Affordable Care Act. That's how we get our insurance. When I became the senior Democrat on the banking committee, Connie and I made a decision that we would not own any corporate stocks because, frankly, we thought it was a conflict of interest. So I wake up every day ready to join the fight for Ohio workers. If you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work. That's why I will always fight for Medicare. I will always fight for Social Security. I will always fight for higher wages for workers. I will always fight for lower health care costs. That's why you sent me to the Senate. That's why I ask for your vote for 6 more years.
Congressman Renacci. Congressman Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, look, in 1997, there was a congressman who said that he realizes, and he supports the people of Ohio, who said the biggest problem in Ohio is biggest problem in Washington is people get elected, they go to Washington, they spend 20 to 30 years, and they forget about the people that elected them. That congressman was Congressman Sherrod Brown. The problem is he's now been there for 25 years, and he wants to be there over 30 years. And he doesn't represent Ohio values. He's the 4th most liberal senator in the country. That's not Ohio values. He votes 97% of the time with his party, 96% of the time with Chuck Schumer, and 94% of the time with Elizabeth Warren. That's not Ohio values. He also, look at his background. He supports sanctuary cities. Ohio don't support sanctuary cities. He supports open borders. Him and his party want to eliminate ICE. These are all things that aren't supported by Ohioans. Look, I have said all along, I will work to make sure Ohio is first. I understand what it is to come here as a poor kid and live the American dream. I love this state. It's given me the opportunity to live the American dream, and I want to make sure that I can give others the. So if I am successful, which I plan on being on November 6th, you can guarantee this, that I will work with anyone, Republican, Democrats, Independents, to make sure that we make Ohio and Ohioans first. I want to thank you. Look, November 6th is right around the corner. I hope I can earn your vote and your support, and thank you again.
That concludes a very spirited debate and a very enthusiastic audience that we've had here tonight. Thank you. 1 second. That concludes our debate for you tonight. A special thank you to our partners and our hosts tonight here at Miami University. We could not do it without them tonight. And as we leave you, we do invite our audience in thanking both of our candidates tonight for being a part of this very important discussion of the issues facing our state and our country.